Although they accompany us the entire game, from the opening cutscene to every lamp location we visit, the messengers to some extent remain unexplained supporting cast members of the Bloodborne story. What exactly are the messengers? Why do they gather at the lamps? And why do we find them in these stone baths and this tree stump? In this episode, we'll extract bits and pieces from the game's underbelly to try and solve these mysteries. To do that, we'll need to inspect the messengers' physical features, when and where the messengers appear in the game, and what roles or purposes they serve. This undertaking leads us to conclude that these bizarre creatures aren't just the whimsical imps we might have thought. And we'll also find that the mythology of the messengers reveals as much about them as it does about us. For this examination of the messengers, let's start with what we can most easily discern with a visual inspection. What's most immediately noticeable, of course, is their strange zombie-like appearance, with their malformed faces and somewhat skeletal bodies. Assuming this isn't their natural state, and the messengers aren't some sort of unique species in the Bloodborne universe, this certainly would indicate that these humanoid creatures are dead or perhaps undead. The name of the messengers in Japanese essentially confirms this critical detail for us. In his video essay titled The Old Blood Explained, Last Protagonist noted that in the original Japanese, the messengers are called shisha, which appears to be a clever use of a homophone. Although shisha can mean messenger or emissary, this term shares the same pronunciation with shisha, meaning dead or deceased. Although one could argue this is pure coincidence, as we begin to turn over stone after stone in our excavation of the messengers, this naming decision by From Software will seem completely deliberate. The messengers are dead. Aside from their corpse-like appearance, thanks to their small stature, the messengers also appear somewhat childlike. Taken together, these details suggest that these creatures might very well be dead children, or spirits of dead children. This idea isn't new, but it isn't just reliant upon these surface-level observations. To the contrary, there's a trove of compelling evidence to support this line of thinking. In this section, we'll progress from the most basic to the most robust supporting information. Within the Nightmare Frontier, we can obtain a somewhat frivolous item called Messenger's Gift, which transforms the player character into a small group of messengers. While the English text refers to this transformation as a parlor trick, in the Japanese it's described as a childish kind of illusion, or a type of illusion on the level of child's play. There's also a small collection of purely cosmetic items that are exclusive to the messengers, which allow us to outfit them in bows, bandages, or even church attire. The description for almost all these accessories includes the statement, "Why not let them be happy and revel as babes?" All these descriptions allude to the happiness of infants, children at play, and babes in revelry. The infant-like physiognomy of the messengers, coupled with these item descriptions that refer to their childlike behavior, bolsters the notion that the messengers are, or at one point were, human children. But those are minor details compared to what we can discern from the vessels that house the messengers, the stump and the baths. These change everything. Let's first turn our attention to the stump, where we can change the outfits and accessories of the messengers. If we're operating on the assumption that 1, the messengers are dead, and 2, they're childlike, then we're able to make a massive revelation about where From Software drew inspiration for this environmental feature. The mountainous region of Tanah Toraja in central Indonesia is home to an ethnic group called the Torajans, who are known primarily for one thing: their unique rituals to treat and honor the dead. Although the Torajans practice a form of Christianity, their spiritual beliefs are distinct from observers of the faith across the world. In Tanah Toraja, the dead must receive a funeral commensurate with their status in the culture's caste system. Otherwise, the soul of the deceased won't pass on to the afterlife. For that reason, most families, which have no intergenerational wealth, save for years to pay for funeral expenses, which primarily involves the purchase of pigs and water buffalo that are slaughtered in honor of their dead loved one. During this period of saving, the body of the deceased remains in the home and is treated as if the dead family member is still alive. But the funeral rites for dead infants and stillborn children are perhaps even more remarkable. In Torajan culture, when a fetus or newborn dies, in order to send its spirit directly to the afterlife, the family will carve a hole in a breadfruit tree and place the body of the deceased child inside. They cover the hollow with palm fibers, and years later, when the fibers have fallen away, the child's body will have been absorbed by the tree. For the Torajans, this arboreal grave serves as a second womb, and when the tree dies, a timely death has been achieved. This is an intriguing explanation for why the messengers of Bloodborne reside in the stump. It's an indication to us that, like dead Torajan infants, the messengers are dead children. But there's more to it than that. As part of their ongoing efforts to honor their deceased loved ones, the Torajans routinely change the clothes of the dead, which involves exhuming the corpse every few years to change its clothes and accessories, such as jewelry and eyeglasses. The messengers of the stump, who live in the hollow of a tree, similarly allow us to change their attire and accessories. This seems to explain why the item descriptions of most messenger accessories state, "The inhabitants of the stump appear to have an interest in adornment." That might clarify matters involving the stump, but what about the baths? Again, if we're operating on the assumption that the messengers are dead and childlike, we can find our answers. These stone installations within the Hunter's Dream and deep within the Chalice dungeons are called baths, we know, because the Saw Hunter badge refers to, quote, the messengers in the bath. But this word choice appears to be a bit of misdirection. These are actually baptismal fonts, the sacred vessels used to baptize newborn children. Although many denominations of Christianity observe baptism, some view the practice as largely symbolic of one's acceptance of Christ as a personal savior, while treating the act of baptism as the cleansing or washing away of one's sin. Catholicism, though, for centuries has treated baptism as a necessity for spiritual salvation and admittance to heaven. This stems from Christ's exchange with Nicodemus in the New Testament book of John, chapter 3. Nicodemus tells Jesus, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him." Jesus answered him, "I say to you, unless one is born anew, he cannot see the kingdom of God." Nicodemus said to him, "How can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born?" Jesus answered, "Unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God." Because of Jesus' rather unequivocal statement that baptism is necessary for salvation, many Christian denominations, including Catholicism, Christian Orthodoxy, and Lutheranism, among others, don't leave fate to chance. Rather than allowing a person to accept baptism at a later time in life, these denominations practice infant baptism shortly after a child is born. For Catholics, this is an edict contained within the Code of Canon Law, which states, "Parents are obliged to take care that infants are baptized in the first few weeks. As soon as possible after the birth, or even before it, they are to go to the pastor to request the sacrament for their child and to be prepared properly for it. An infant in danger of death is to be baptized without delay." But what happens when a child dies before it can be baptized, whether dying while still in the womb or shortly after birth? This has been a point of uncertainty and ecumenical debate for centuries. Theologians from as early as the 4th century contended that because dead infants were incapable of any moral act, it isn't reasonable that they should suffer the punishment of hell. But because these children were never baptized and thus were still stained by the original sin of Adam that applied to all mankind, they could never ascend to heaven. Christian scholars reasoned that there must be a destination for dead, unbaptized infants whose only fault was being conceived into a sinful human race. Around 370 AD, the Archbishop of Constantinople, Gregory of Nazianzus, composed an oration on the topic of baptism. St. Gregory reasoned that those who fail to receive the gift of baptism, perhaps on account of infancy or some perfectly involuntary circumstance through which they are prevented from receiving it, will be neither glorified nor punished by the righteous judge. It was this rationale that over time led to the hypothesis of a limbo of infants, a realm bordering hell where the souls of unbaptized children would go for all eternity. This realm, in theory, would contain the spirits of aborted fetuses, of children who died in the womb, of those who died shortly after birth, or those who were still too young to have developed the cognitive capacity for reason. Of great debate for centuries was whether these innocent souls would suffer pain, like the souls in hell, or would simply be deprived of the ultimate glory of heaven and the joy given by the beatific vision, coming face to face with God. The prominent 13th century philosopher and theologian St. Thomas Aquinas reasoned that these infant souls wouldn't be merely free from pain. They would be in a state of natural joy, unaware that they had been deprived of the vision of God. Although the limbo of infants was never formally adopted as part of Catholic doctrine, the idea persisted for nearly 1700 years until the Church, under Pope Benedict XVI, officially rejected the concept of limbo in 2007. The messengers of Bloodborne, as we've shown, appear to be dead and childlike. And as the doll tells us, these little ones are inhabitants of the dream. The hunter's dream is their home for all intents and purposes. So why are they found in these baptismal fonts and this tree stump? It's to symbolize that the messengers aren't just children. They're children who died in the womb or shortly after birth, hence before they could be baptized, and they've been relegated to this hunter's dream, a limbo of infants for these messengers. Why would the messengers be the spirits of dead fetuses or newborns? We'll return to this concept in part 2. While we focus so far on what the messengers are, we need to shift our attention to what the messengers do. What exactly is their purpose in the game? We receive our first major clue during Bloodborne's opening cutscene. After we're administered the Yharnam blood, we seem to lose consciousness and experience a vision or hallucination. The messengers rise from beneath the operating table and eventually overtake us as our field of vision fades to black. That's when we hear the voice of the doll for the first time.
Ah, you found yourself a hunter.
Because the doll and the messengers inhabit the hunter's dream, this short scene seems to suggest that the messengers have somehow latched on to the soul or essence of the player character and delivered it from Iosefka's clinic to the hunter's dream. This sequence provides us with one of the most important insights into the messenger's purpose in the lore. They're not just our companions, they're psychopomps. A psychopomp is a guide to or protector of the soul as it makes the journey from the land of the living to some inevitable afterlife destination. For thousands of years, psychopomps have assumed numerous forms across a variety of cultures and religions, from human figures such as a shaman to spirit animals such as dogs or deer. But there are other commonly known psychopomps. In Norse mythology, for example, the psychopomps of fallen warriors were the Valkyrie. These warrior maidens were responsible for guiding the souls of the dead to Valhalla, Odin's hall within Asgard, the realm of the gods. In ancient Hebrew texts, the archangel Michael is described as the psychopomp to the patriarchs, delivering the souls of Adam, Moses, and Abraham from earth to heaven. How do we know that the messengers are psychopomps? There are many pieces of supporting evidence, but let's start with the most basic. Even though it's called the hunter's dream, this area is overtly portrayed as an afterlife of sorts. Let's think about it. When we die in the game for the first time, what happens to us? We don't just start over at some random respawn point in Central Yharnam. We rise up from the ground of the hunter's dream in a haze, surrounded by gravestones and an endless sky of impenetrable fog. We're being shown, at least initially, that this is where we go when we die. The messengers somehow brought us here in the opening cutscene, and the doll's voice confirms that. Perhaps more accurately, they guided our soul here, just as a psychopomp would do. But that's just the beginning. Although Bloodborne contains about 15 distinct regions, from Central Yharnam to Byrgenwerth to Cainhurst, it's largely divided between two realms or dimensions, the waking world and the dreamlands. The unsavory regions of the dreamlands include the Hunter's Nightmare, the Nightmare Frontier, and the Nightmare of Mensis. The lecture building, according to the lecture theater key, also is adrift in the nightmare. And the dreamlands include the Hunter's Dream, although it might be slightly unique, as we'll discuss later on. The player character can cross into the dreamlands by touching the dead body of Miklash near Advent Plaza, or by carrying the eye of a blood-drunk hunter while being killed by an amygdala. But if we want to access the Hunter's Dream, or return to the waking world from the dream, we need something else. We need the messengers. Not only does it seem clear that the messengers first delivered us to the Hunter's Dream during the opening cutscene, these creatures can be found alongside the mechanisms that we use to travel between worlds. They suddenly emerge at the base of the lamps that allow us to travel to the Hunter's Dream. The messengers also reside at the base of the headstones of awakening in the Hunter's Dream, which allow us to reach the lamp locations everywhere throughout the game. If we want to travel to the dream or to any lamp location, it would seem the messengers are necessary to make that journey. During Bloodborne's development, From Software had implemented a travel system only slightly different from what we receive in the game's finished product. In earlier drafts, the player character was supposed to take a seat in a chair and slowly nod off, allowing them to return to the Hunter's Dream. Although developers eventually settled on lamps instead of chairs, even in earlier stages of development, the messengers appear to have been part of the travel mechanic, as Lance McDonald demonstrated in 2018. The messengers arise from the ground at the foot of the chairs, just as they do with the lamps in the commercially released version of the game. I think this is important because it suggests that interdimensional travel isn't contingent upon a certain mechanism. It's contingent upon the messengers. All of this substantiates the idea that the messengers serve as our spiritual escorts across the boundary of the dreaming and waking worlds. If the messengers are indeed the psychopomps of Bloodborne, it seems worthwhile to take a closer look at this phenomenon and where From Software might have drawn inspiration from real-world mythology and religion. This is where the psychopomp idea truly takes flight. Although psychopomps manifest in many forms, some of the most widely recognized psychopomps are deities, including the Egyptian god Anubis and the Greek goddess Hecate. But commonly considered the archetype of psychopomps is the Roman god Mercury. Mercury, along with his Greek predecessor Hermes, was responsible for ushering souls to the underworld. This meant delivering them to the banks of the river Styx, where the next psychopomp, Charon, would ferry them to Hades. But as with many Hellenic deities and their Roman offshoots, these weren't the only areas of divine oversight for these gods. In addition to their role as guides to the dead, Hermes and Mercury were the gods of messages, or just commonly known as the messenger gods. They were regularly depicted as wearing a winged hat and winged sandals that allowed them to travel swiftly and shuttle messages or proclamations between the gods. And because Hermes was the only deity in the Greek pantheon who could cross into the underworld and return, he was seen as the intermediary between Hades and Olympus. That's why Hermes and Mercury were considered the gods of boundaries. In fact, it's possible that Hermes' name comes from Herma, an ancient Greek term for piles of stones that served as territorial boundary markers or trail markers. Aside from their roles as conveyors of messages and souls, Hermes and Mercury were the gods of commerce and merchants. Although it's disputed, it's possible that the Latin mercari, meaning to trade, may have originated from Mercurius, the Latin name for the god Mercury. Words in Romance languages associated with marketplaces, including marché or mercado, might be derived from Mercury. What does all this mythology have to do with the messengers? Well, let's ask ourselves, what are the messengers responsible for? First, as we've discussed, the messengers seem to usher the soul of the player character between worlds. They do this in the opening cutscene of the game, and presumably every time we travel using the lamps or headstones. This suggests that the messengers, like Hermes and Mercury, fulfill some sort of psychopomp responsibility within the game's mythology. But what else do the messengers do? Just like their name tells us, they deliver messages. The description for the notebook item tells us, leave a note using messengers. Use them to send messages to other worlds. Here, just like with Hermes and Mercury, the gods who relayed messages between the lands of the living and the dead, the messengers are responsible for the conveyance of messages between worlds. But what else do the messengers do? Their vital role, as easy as it is to take for granted, is to serve as the merchants of the game. These bizarre figures who can't walk or speak, for some inexplicable reason, were designed as the vendors of the game. We buy and sell weapons, armor, and consumables by interacting with the messengers, not with Gehrman or the doll or some human being at a shop. We conduct business with the messengers. Mercury and Hermes were the gods of shopkeepers and merchants, and the messenger baths are the marketplaces of Bloodborne. Because of their association with messages, commerce, conveyance of souls to the afterlife, and their ability to cross into all planes of existence within the Bloodborne universe, the messengers appear to be representative of, or somehow intertwined with the mythos of, the god Mercury. Why is that so? Although there might be much more to it, I think this association with Mercury is to confirm the psychopomp role of the messengers, and simultaneously demonstrate that the Hunter's Dream and the Nightmare regions aren't just to be seen as alternative planes of existence or dreamlands. We're supposed to see them as afterlives for the messengers, the hunters, and the scholars of Bloodborne. That's what we'll explore in Part 2. Thanks for watching.